you're not just estimating.
Everyone agrees assessment is essential.
And I want you to mark it using those criteria we've seen before.
But the education world is divided about what it should be for and how to do it. Over the past 20 years, assessment in England has been dominated by summative testing and league tables, designed to drive up standards and make schools accountable.
Which makes it more tense.
But many believe that a shift away from testing towards formative assessment in the classroom would be a far more effective way to raise achievement.
It's fundamentally about, did the children just learn what I just taught? If not, why not?
They claim that using assessment for learning, or AFL, the system where teachers monitor and adjust their teaching in response to how well students have understood the lesson, would boost learning more than any other form of assessment.
Sodium hydroxide.
But turning AFL theory into practice has proved a minefield. Recently, the government's own Assessment for Learning strategy, APP, or Assessing Pupils' Progress, has further complicated the debate.
Well, in theory, I think it's a great idea. In practice, where are we possibly going to file their work?
It's a learning curve. I think when anybody comes across something that is new, it's going to be difficult at first. And I just think it's trial and error. I'm not saying we're getting it right, but we are having a go.
So how well are AFL and APP working in our schools? And do they complement or contradict each other? In 1998, a leading advocate of assessment for learning, Dylan William, along with Professor Paul Black, published Inside the Black Box. Based on extensive research, they argued the education system would be revolutionised if their ideas were put into practice.
Governments were keen to improve education, but they were never focusing on the thing that really matters, which is what is happening day in, day out in every classroom. Getting teachers to pay more attention to what their children had actually learned, to help them make adjustments to that, to their teaching, probably would improve student learning by more than anything else that we'd ever come across. And in retrospect, it's an incredibly obvious idea. Children do not learn what we teach. Teachers teach these brilliant lessons, but when you take in the kids' exercise books, you realise that they weren't actually learning what we thought we were teaching. We find it far less...
But over the last decade, assessment for learning has struggled to gain a strong foothold in English schools.
So the idea that teachers are invested in this...
The problem has been turning theory into practice.
Today, the focus is on implementation. How do you support more teachers in making more use of minute-by-minute and day-by-day formative assessment in their classroom? Schools have tended to go for the easy bits. So compiling spreadsheets that show how kids are progressing is a very easy thing to do. But actually changing the practice of the teachers in the classroom is very, very much harder.
For Dylan William, the key to AFL is for students to understand exactly what they're learning, and for teachers to use astute questioning and assessment techniques that help move learners forward.
In the 1998 review, Paul Black and I said that what was really important was students were given feedback by way of comments rather than scores or grades. But even where schools have adopted that, they've tended to give comments that are about what was missing or deficient about the last piece of work, not what you need to do to make the next piece of work better. Somebody once described that as the difference between having a medical and a post-mortem. And the trouble is that much of the feedback that children get in our classrooms are post-mortems, not medical diagnoses of what they need to do next to carry on improving.
Another key component of AFL is to empower students to become owners of their own learning.
The idea is that children should be helping each other learn. It brings in ideas of self-assessment and peer assessment, but it's also a much broader idea that encompasses collaborative learning, so that they are confident, autonomous learners.
After the Black Box was published, Dylan William oversaw an AFL pilot, which helped to refine the practice. But since then, many schools have found it hard to fully adopt the ideas. One exception is Cater Park in Beckenham.
OK, girls, the final thing I want you to do today is I want you to take 3 Post-its each from
Here, chemistry teacher Kate Camion-Smith is using an AFL technique to gauge how well the students have understood her lesson.
Third post-it, something you still don't understand, or if you understood everything, something you want to know more about, OK? So on the post-it, I want you to write that down. I also want you to put your name on the bottom of it. Is there anybody who does not understand what they need to do? OK?
The school fully adopted AFL 4 years ago. Since then, GCSE results have risen by 20%, and they claim AFL has been a major factor.
Stuck it on, make sure you move back.
The initiative has been led by Assistant Head Sally Kelly.
We started with really some of the more simple areas, which are making sure that learning intentions are really, really clear, and really trying to make sure that we involve all the learners. And so really that's about questioning strategies, making sure, for example, that teachers give students time to answer questions. Things like post-it notes so that teachers can, in real time, check if students have understood a key question. We also made it easier for teachers by giving them sort of goodie bags, if you like, of the things that they actually needed.
The first whiteboard I see holding it up will get a point for that round.
Because obviously teachers are very busy, and if you can ease their planning in any way, it's obviously going to make something more successful. The other thing that we needed to make sure that we were really working on was peer and self-assessment.
So 10 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's right.
10 divided by 5 is 2.
The AFL theory is that peer assessment helps student engagement and deepens their understanding.
Granny, what do I do when outliners...
We also spoke to the students about what they were doing. They feel more empowered by it. And we feel now we're marching forward to make sure that teachers really are, in real time, taking notice of the things that they're checking in lessons and changing what they do.
But few schools have adapted easily to AFL. And even some of the most experienced teachers have found it difficult to master.
Through researching it, I've kind of discovered, and I think most teachers now know, that if you are being observed by Ofsted, you should do a little bit of peer assessment. And, you know, that will tick the AFL box quite nicely. Of course, this means that nobody's practice has changed in any way, shape or form, OK? We just know how to respond to it just about for Ofsted's purposes.
And teachers, for their part, need to accept that responsibility. They need to be...
At a 2009 conference on testing and assessment, AFL was high on the agenda.
19th century.
Attending were senior figures from across the educational establishment.
It looks simple. It is not simple, but it's perfectly doable, and the benefits are well attested to. We've got to encourage a culture where...
Professor Mary James headed up the influential Learning How to Learn project. A key finding was that 80% of teachers were struggling to put AFL into practice.
...onto reading, writing and mathematics.
Matthew Portal, London Borough of Newham. And I find going round just normal schools, not ones necessarily involved in research projects and doing special initiatives of various kinds, that it's actually very rare indeed to see a really first-class assessment for learning-based lesson.
You're absolutely right. We worked with 40 schools, and we looked at what was happening in those 40 schools, 1,500 teachers. And to be honest, we thought only 20% of the teachers had captured what we called the spirit of assessment for learning.
OK, the next one is apples.
The difficulty for teachers is that AFL techniques require a great deal of precision if they're to ensure deeper student learning.
9, and it's this group down the front again.
Teachers also needed to understand the principles, if you like, that underpin those practices, because they could become ritualistic and mechanistic if teachers just took some ideas and then sprinkled them throughout their lessons. A particular example might be clarifying learning objectives at the beginning of the lesson. And many teachers in schools would write their learning objective on the board. Well, after a short period of time, that becomes invisible.
Looking back, Dylan William accepts that changing mindsets was far more challenging than he anticipated.
I think that we were hopelessly naive back in the 1990s about how difficult it would be to secure these kinds of changes across a system. And every time we think we've actually got the answers, we realise that there's another even bigger question that we haven't answered in terms of helping people do this at scale. At the other extreme...
He now believes the answer to implementing AFL lies with sharply focused in-school training and teacher collaboration in what he calls teacher learning communities.
And it's not a top-down model at all. It's about somebody becoming a member of this teacher learning community to get support of the rest of the group for the things that they want to change about their practice. What we do know is that I think that 75 minutes per month is a minimum for this. Schools have tried to split the meetings, schools have tried to do it in different kinds of ways, and it rarely works as well. 75 minutes once a month appears to be the minimum.
In May 2008, the government launched its own AFL strategy and came up with a completely new system called Assessing Pupil Progress. APP gives teachers improvement criteria linked to national standards, so they can create detailed profiles of students' strengths and weaknesses. The government argued that teachers can use this information to adjust their teaching and help improve performance. Backed by £150 million of government funding over 3 years, APP has been developed by a range of organisations, including the QCDA. One of the driving forces behind its introduction was Dr. Sue Horner.
Teachers say, this is the bit that we've been looking for. It completes the picture. We've got a curriculum, we've got the end of key stage assessments. We have to think about how pupils are getting on day to day. This is the bit in the middle that we've been looking for. They also say that the criteria have given them a new way of thinking about what they're teaching. And they say that they find that really useful.
APP has been piloted in English, Maths and Science at Key Stages 2 and 3. South Camden Community School in North London was one of the schools taking part.
This particular assessment focus covers these 4 areas, these 4 skills.
In this Year 8 lesson, the focus will be on APP criteria designed to help students improve presentation and group work skills.
OK? It's about looking at how valid you think your evidence is, and also about scientists working together. Now that you've got these statements which help you to kind of focus in on what level a student is, it means that within the department, it's been quite helpful for different levels of experience. So now we're marking more consistently.
Million kilometres.
The diameter at the equator is 2,324 kilometres.
Because it is so small, it's classified as a dwarf planet.
Pluto has 3 known moons called Charon.
Some of the students are quite enjoying APP because we're being quite creative with what we're doing in class. And there's lots more things going on that we wouldn't normally be doing.
It's a massive 247.7 years.
Thank you for listening.
After the pilot, APP was rolled out nationally, and many began to explore how the traditional ideas of AFL and the new APP strategy could best work together. At Cater Park, they initially welcomed APP.
I was actually quite excited when I first sort of looked at the concept, because initially it seemed to be something that would support learning. It would, the criteria that were going to be there could help teachers actually plan good learning objectives for the gaps in student knowledge. I thought, oh, well, brilliant, there's some clear criteria there that students can get involved in assessing their own learning. And I thought, absolutely fantastic, it fits in exactly with what we're been doing with assessment for learning. So at first it looked like it was a great idea.
Okay, along the list of grids there are 8 assessment focuses, okay, and these are some of them.
English teacher Claire Williams is introducing APP criteria to students in a poetry lesson.
AF2, understand, describe, select information and use quotations.
Thank you.
The problem with it is if you look at the language, first of all, it's very, very complex.
Comments on structural choices show some general awareness of writer's craft, e.g. it tells you all things burglars or something like that can do to your house. And then the last section...
It almost automatically excludes the possibility of students being involved in tracking their own progress. The second thing is the sheer volume of it. There are pages and pages of criteria of different strands, and it does seem a little bit unwieldy.
What I found daunting, I don't know if you can... This sheet here, really? There's so much on it that it's been printed on A3. If you reduce it to A4, then most staff can't read it.
Each APP grid consists of lists of criteria matched with national levels of achievement.
So, for example, critically evaluate information and evidence from various sources explaining limitations, misrepresentation or lack of balance. I understand what that means, but say a student in Year 8 would have no clue what that actually means and what they need to do to be able to move from the one below to that.
The criteria are designed for teachers to use, and we make no apologies for that. They are about teachers' professional judgments.
Let's look at the next skill. Did you use scientific terms and symbols correctly?
In secondary schools, we have found many teachers tell us that they teach their pupils what the meaning is of the words. They don't need to change them, they just help them understand them. And in secondary schools, that has not really been such an issue in our experience.
Look through the level ladder and you decide which one you think you fall in.
However, in Camden, they found it necessary to help most pupils understand APP by using simplified language maps.
Did you explain the form and communicate your ideas to your audience? OK. But you tried, didn't you? OK, so you go to the next strand, using scientific terms and symbols correctly.
I've actually downloaded something that is in pupil speak from the TES as a teacher resource that somebody has actually uploaded to share with other colleagues.
Another concern is that APP appears to require extensive data collection for monitoring students' progress.
In practice, we've got 200 kids in each year, so year 7, 8, 9, that's 600 students, and we have no space. Where are we possibly going to file their work? Just so much evidence for every single thing on here. How are we physically going to keep this?
What teachers have also said to me when I go to conferences is I can't be doing with all these enormous numbers of folders with lots and lots of things I'm supposed to put in them, and it's a great big burden and I can't cope with it, and I fully agree with them about that. We never intended that you had to have great big folders for every child and that somehow you couldn't manage to do APP if you didn't. So it is important to think about how to bring APP to life in the classroom by teachers understanding it from the inside, not on the basis of bits of paper.
But some schools prefer the more intuitive traditional model of AFL, rather than the new data-collecting focus of APP.
It is possible that APP could support assessment for learning, but it has slightly muddied the waters, and it has meant that we are focusing on implementing the APP strategy instead of developing what was really quite a strong strategy in assessment for learning.
It's a view shared by Dylan William, who believes APP has lost sight of the original formative spirit of AFL.
I think, like most translations, it's captured some of the meaning and not some of the most important bits of the meaning. So yes, there has been a loss in the translation. If your approach to AFL makes any use of a spreadsheet, you're not doing the kind of AFL that makes the most difference to children. They've also left well alone the stuff that makes the biggest difference to children, which is how their teachers teach minute by minute and day by day. And it's just that change in focus that I think has been so counterproductive.
Perhaps what I should do is make a distinction between assessment for learning as Black and William have it, which is about day-to-day pupil involvement in their learning, which I do think is really important, and what APP offers, which is the link to national standards.
So look for that card.
Up till now, it's been a voluntary and flexible scheme, with over 9 in 10 schools taking it up.
Okay, so you weren't sure?
But APP is now at a crossroads.
I know most of you.
If it remains voluntary, schools could continue to customise it in ways that help the teacher adjust their teaching to how well students have understood the lesson.
It's a good word to show when he's upset. For.
But some fear that if APP is made compulsory and more uniform, it could become yet another form of summative assessment, used to test children and for Ofsted to monitor the performance of schools.
Did you put that into level 5?
There's always the fear that when it comes to looking at our standards, that they are going to want to see summative data based on the APP. If it becomes a summative tool, then it's going to become a bureaucratic nightmare.
I think it is true, as far as I understand it, that Ofsted does expect to be able to see how schools trace progress and how they reach the outcomes that they do, and that they do know how their children are doing. I don't think Ofsted or other people have a view there is only one way to do that. However, I do think that APP is as good as many and better than a lot, and so therefore I would be asking schools to seriously think about using APP.
But Dylan William believes that even if APP remains voluntary, its hybrid mix of formative and summative assessment will continue to cause problems for most schools.
Thank you. Wonderful.
There's no doubt in my mind that the actions the government has taken has resulted in a very confused picture. If you try to make the same system serve both formative and summative functions, then what happens is the shadow of the summative extends right throughout the learning, so that everything becomes about record keeping.
And what do you say to people who say it's really important to keep summative and formative forms of assessment separate?
That's fine, but I think it's not quite the real world, because why would we not use what information we can get from whatever assessment, both in terms of helping pupils make more progress and in terms of being able to say, I know where they are and I know how they relate to national standards.
Discussions about APP are also part of a complex national debate on the future of assessment in England, and in particular, the right balance between formative and summative assessment.
The fact of the matter is that APP should be supporting assessment. It should be cherry-picked, actually. It should be sampled, and it should be an iterative process, and it should be part of a professional development process, not an imposition.
In terms of policy, government needs to back off AFL, to be quite honest, because it seems to me that AFL is fundamentally a matter of pedagogy. It's how teachers teach. And when government tries to intrude into that, it generally gets things wrong. And that's why it's muddied the waters. So if it's seriously interested about clarifying the waters, it needs to create a structure, a framework for holding schools accountable, that holds schools accountable for the things they can change, how much progress kids make, and then leave the schools to get on with it.
I don't think we can get away from the fact that you need to have some independent accountability in the system, and I don't think it's enough to have the system entirely assessing itself. You know, after all, we're in an age where there's lots of complaints in the health service or in Parliament where you have people trying to police themselves, and we're moving into an age of greater, not less, accountability. And in those circumstances, I cannot see how you can get away from having summative assessment, and I think, in fact, it would be wrong to do so.
We can't have schools as secret gardens where nobody understands what's happening. And so you need to be able to explain what's going on so that we can be accountable for individual children, for school performance, and as a nation for how we're getting on.
Is there any other reason? I want Sultana to tell me.
The future of assessment is in flux.
Brilliant. OK.
A recent Common Schools Committee report delivered a surprising new message. Trust the teachers. However, the party political debate remains largely centred on the best way of using assessment to hold schools to account.
There have been some quite significant policy developments over the last 12, 18 months, particularly the proposals from the Tories to get rid of the SATs tests at the end of Key Stage 2 and replace them with tests at the start of Key Stage 3. And the government is also looking at supplementing league tables with report cards based on only partly on exam performance. But I think at a fundamental level, you don't see huge differences between the parties on assessment and accountability policy. I don't think anybody is really talking about the holistic look at the side effects of assessment-based accountability and summative assessment in terms of the learning experiences for pupils.
The playing around with where do you actually put the tests and so forth is just an indication of the nervousness that policymakers or politicians have with getting rid of testing. And I don't think we can go down this route very much longer.
Can I ask you to try something out? Can you all hold your hands?
For the guru of AFL, the best way forward is to give summative testing a lighter footprint and to clarify the exact purpose of each form of assessment.
If you think about it in terms of a sporting metaphor, I think that GCSE is the Olympics. I think APP is the 2-monthly track meet where you go and try out and you have qualifying rounds and all the rest of it. But AFL is all the training you do between these events so that when you come to those events, you're in a position to do as well as you possibly can. And I think getting the balance between those different kinds of assessment. What's the purpose of this? Is the purpose of this assessment to help the students learn better, or is it to record what they've already learned? And I think APP and GCSE are more about recording what students have learned. I think the AFL is the training part of it. How do we improve this person's ability at this particular activity?